tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammāṃ Saṅghāṃ Namasami. January 21st, 2021, half moon, Wanpra, Lunar Observance Day, Abhayagiri Monastery, Redwood Valley, California. A winter retreat. So, seems to be going well so far. Winter retreat. And it feels very spacious. And we've had a bit of rain a little over a week ago, and then followed by a period of sun, and now it's cooling down again. And we're studying the life of the Buddha's biography. So there's various stories and teachings around the life of the Buddha that we're able to dive into and enjoy. In looking for suttas and readings to add on to Venerable Ñāṇamoli's Life of the Buddha book, I was reading through some suttas, and there was one where sometimes it happens that the bhikkhus are engaged in some sort of Dhamma discourse or Dhamma discussion, and the Buddha comes in the evening and says, "Oh, what were you bhikkhus talking about?" And they'll explain something they were talking about, either the marvelous and wonderful qualities of the Tathagata, or they're talking about some other Dhamma topic. So there was this one sutta where the bhikkhus came together and they were arguing with each other. And they were arguing with each other, stabbing each other with verbal daggers. It doesn't say what they were arguing about. And the Buddha comes in the evening and he says, "Bhikkhus, what were you talking about? What kind of discussion did I interrupt?" And they say, "Lord, we were arguing, stabbing each other with verbal daggers." And then the Buddha, it's very kind of understated. The Buddha says, "Monks, it is not befitting that you argue, stabbing each other with verbal daggers. You should look on each other kindly with metta." And it's a very simple sutta, and that's about it for the sutta. And then I thought it was interesting that the Buddha didn't say, try to figure out who was right and who was wrong, and try to say, well, you guys are right, you guys are wrong. Rather than that, he just says, it's not so good to argue and be mean to each other, essentially. So the Buddha's always lifting up communal harmony as a top priority. So I thought that kind of a sutta was apt for just where our society is at today, kind of very divided, it's no secret. And so, and I was thinking of kind of the etymology of the word sotapanna and kind of reflecting on those two things And I think one of the issues, one of the problems is people tend to not listen to each other. So this can be a problem. And so often when we don't feel heard, then difficulties ensue from that. And so, there can be a lot of arguing and not seeing eye to eye with each other, or disagreements. And so this idea that of listening is quite needed, or quite apt, and needed in a very radical way these days, I think. And that's really the issue, is we want to tell people how it is, but we don't want to listen to somebody else's viewpoint of how it is if it differs from ours. And because we're obviously right and they're obviously wrong. And I feel it, and I'm very sure of it. And you get 350 million people feeling that way. So the word sotapanna, sota means stream. It's translated as stream enterer or stream winner. Sota can also mean, like I said, sotapanna can mean one who has entered the stream of the Dhamma. Sotapanna, sota can also mean hearing. So one possible translation is also one who hears. So we can extend that to one who listens, one who's listening. So we can ask ourselves, are we listening? Are we willing to listen? The old adage, like knowledge tells, wisdom listens. So I do think there is something to that. Like panya is like this inner discernment that which it's not coming from book knowledge or something we've read or listened to, but it's coming from this natural law, this natural wisdom. It's coming from Dhamma. I know one definition of the Buddha's teaching or of Buddhism is the way of natural law, or the way of nature, or the way of things according to natural law, causes and conditions. So it's really hard to say with certainty, what's happening in the world right now. But what we can say is everything is uncertain. That's natural law. That's Dhamma. The one who listens, the one who knows, they know anicca, they know uncertainty. And then that seeing, that knowing, that hearing, that leads to letting go. And that's what we want. So, but then to do this, it takes a lot of carefulness. And without the foundation of sila, of precepts, virtue, it won't be right, it won't be true, I guess we could say. So we need sila, so we need a lot of virtue, we need a lot of kindness, we need a lot of metta, a lot of non-judgmental awareness. That's one translation of metta, which I like. Non-judgmental awareness. Then you get samma, or harmony. Then things can exist in harmony. So the Noble Eightfold Path, the samma ditthi, samma sankappo, samma vaca, samma kammanto, samma ajiwo, samma vayamo, samma sati, samadhi. That's the 8 sammas, so those things are in harmony, in tune. Reading through this one sutta, the Great 40, the Buddha starts out by saying that noble right concentration has 7 factors. What are those 7 factors? Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness. That's how noble right concentration has 7 factors. So those previous 7 factors of the path. So it all comes together with the meditation. That's what we're seeking. So that's harmony as well. Yeah. Another little reflection coming up is that feeling very sure about something doesn't make it true. Yeah, feeling very sure about something doesn't make it true. But if we feel very sure, then we can reflect not sure to kind of counteract that imbalance. So this sense of not sure or anicca, then it actually can give a sense of confidence. That's the real refuge. The real refuge is in Dhamma, so that comes from seeing not sure. It comes from seeing anicca, dukkha, anatta. So that's kind of asking ourselves, what are we taking refuge in? Part of the life of the Buddha that we're studying is the first lay adherents to take refuge with the Buddha. It's during his 7th week in the vicinity of the Bodhi tree, and the merchants Tapussa and Balika, and they go to pay respects to the Buddha and offer him the first meal since his awakening. So according to legends and commentaries, the Buddha did actually receive a type of food. Even before that, it was from Saka. Saka, the lord of the devas of the Tavatimsa heaven, came down and offered the Buddha a celestial sama fruit. And the Buddha, I'm not sure if he ate it or if it was just infused into his body somehow, but he received that. So that was the first, perhaps, sustenance that he received, physical sustenance that he received since the awakening under the Bodhi tree. But then, after the 7th week, as the story goes, then Tapussa and Balika wanted to offer food to the newly awakened Buddha, and the Buddha reflected, it is not the way of Buddhas to receive food into the hands. I need a bowl. And then the 4 great kings coming down and offering 4 bowls to the Buddha, and then which combined into 1 bowl, and then that's how he received the food. And they were then wanting to take refuge. They took refuge in the Buddha and in the Dhamma, but the Sangha didn't yet exist, so they took the Dwe Ratana, the double refuge, Dwe Sarana. And they were the first lay people to take the refuges, but it was only 2 refuges at that point. And then the story goes on of the awakening of Anya Kondanya and the other of the 5 ascetics, and the story of Yasa and how his parents were the first male and female lay followers to take the triple refuge. So there's this idea of going for refuge, in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and then that's integral to the story of the life of the Buddha. And then there's the types of ordinations. So the first type of ordination is the Ehi Bhikkhu ordination, where the Buddha just says, "Come, Bhikkhu, this Dhamma is lived for the complete ending of suffering, attainment of Nibbana." And then that's the ordination. That's the ordination of those, of the original bhikkhus. And then after, by the end of the first Vasa at the deer park, there's 61 arhants. The Buddha says, "Go, no two going in the same direction, teach the Dhamma out of compassion for the world." And then from there you get people wandering in from all directions wanting to take ordination with the Buddha. And the Buddha says, "Well, okay, I allow the bhikkhus to give the ordination, and the ordination can be the giving of the triple refuge." So that's the first type of ordination would have been the Ehi Bhikkhu ordination, and then that's replaced by the Tisarana ordination, or the taking of the triple refuge. And of course then later on after that is the motion and 3 announcements ordination, which is the much more involved ordination that we do now, today. That's the ordination that came up later, where there has to be a quorum of ordained bhikkhus and the questioning outside of the Sangha and inside of the Sangha and so on. So that came up later as the Sangha grew large. So there's this idea of taking the Tisarana, the triple refuge, refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha. And the unspoken part of that is previously they were taking refuge in other things other than Buddha Dhamma Sangha. So then the refuge, it's like a changing of allegiance or changing of alliance from whatever we were taking refuge in before to taking refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha. And then making that, putting that at the forefront, making that the priority in one's life. And that's important. And that's the shift that takes place with people, with these groups and the suttas who end up taking refuge, and the Buddha eventually making his way to Rajagaha, and then King Bimbisara taking refuge, and so kings and leaders of the time taking refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and then taking instruction from the Buddha and using his instructions and trying to apply it to their subjects, their kingdoms. So people actually taking that on and trying to apply it. So the refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, then that means that we live according to the Buddha's teachings, but also we're looking at the internal refuges, so Buddho, the one who knows, or the inner Buddha, the knowing, the primordial Buddha, the Buddha that is attainable by any human being who holds to that, the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path, and Sila Samadhi Panya. So that's the true refuge of Buddha. And Dhamma, the external refuge of Dhamma being the teachings given by the historical Buddha, which we have in the Sutta Pitaka and the Vinaya Pitaka. But then also the Dhamma being the natural truth of the way things are, causes and conditions. And that would be the inner refuge of Dhamma. And then Sangha is we say Savaka Sangho, so that's the awakened disciples of the Buddha. That doesn't just include ordained monastics, but also anyone who's seen Dhamma and realized Dhamma. That counts as the Savaka Sangha. So that's the external Sangha refuge. And then the internal Sangha refuge is virtue itself, is Sila itself. That we say Sila is the best protection. So if we want some sort of protection, then we say Sila is the best protection. So that's a refuge as well, because we can fall back on that. Nobody can take that away from us. These are things that can't be stolen from us, things that can't be taken away from us, and things that it's like provisions for the journey. So through this short human existence, this short life that we have, at most 100 years or a little more, and we have this very brief period of time to actualize these refuges. And this is important to focus on. Things going on outside of us or things going on out in the world, these are all temporary and always changing and shifting and always in motion. But these refuges, something we can make much of, and this is provisions for the journey long term. So we have that long view, that long-term vision, that long enduring mind. When we think about the great teachers and Kruba Ajahns of the past, so Longpo Cha, about 29 years ago already, has passed away almost 30 years ago. Yeah. And these things just keep fading into the past. Or we can think of friends and family who were there and then they passed away and now they're not there. So how does that work? How does that happen? That's anicca. It's always happening. It's always happening all around us. Yeah. So that death contemplation is important. Helps us to always come back to the present moment. So many really interesting suttas and teachings, hidden gems that we get in the Sutta Pitaka and in the Vinaya Pitaka also, is like there's one where there's a young girl who has quite a bit of panya, she has quite a bit of discernment and wisdom already, and she goes to have a question and answer session with the Buddha, where the Buddha questions her and she answers. And so she's come from a certain village and comes to pay respects to the Buddha. And then it's almost kind of like a Zen type question and answer session where the Buddha says, "Where did you come from?" And the girl says, "I don't know." And then the Buddha says, "Where are you going?" And the girl says, "I don't know." And then the Buddha says, "You don't know?" And then the girl says, "I know." And then the Buddha says, "You know?" And the girl says, "I don't know." And so then there's all sorts of onlookers, and the lay people are like, "What's going on here?" And someone starts to kind of admonish the girl, saying, like, "You came from such and such a village. You should have answered honestly. How can you lie to the Buddha?" And then the Buddha's kind of sitting there smiling. And so then the girl says, "Well, when the Buddha asked me, 'Where did you come from?' I took that to mean, where were you in your past life?" And I said, "I don't know, because I can't remember my past lives." And when the Buddha said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I don't know, because I don't yet know my future life or my future state." So I said, "I don't know." And then when the Buddha said, "You don't know?" I took that to mean, you don't know? Do you not know that all beings die? And because I know that all beings die, I know that for sure. I said, "I know." And then when the Buddha said, "So you know?" I took that to mean, do you know when you'll die? And when we die is totally uncertain. And so I said, "I don't know. I don't know when I'll die." So so she doesn't know where she came from in terms of where her past birth was. She doesn't know where she's going in terms of her future birth. she does know that she's going to die at some point, and she doesn't know when. So then everybody's, oh, she has a lot of wisdom, has a lot of discernment. So there's those two aspects to death contemplation. There's the certainty and the uncertainty aspect. The certainty is we know we will die at some point. The uncertainty aspect is we don't know when. So we use those two aspects when we do maranasati or mindfulness of death. And then another reflection is the preciousness of the human rebirth. And so this helps us to develop a quality known as samvega, where it's a sense of urgency, a sense of spiritual urgency. And when we contemplate the preciousness of our human rebirth, then we couple that with the death contemplation, and then we make this conscious decision not to waste our precious human rebirth. So we have this precious opportunity to practice virtue, to take refuge, and to actually think about the Dhamma and practice the Dhamma, and actually get to a point where we can realize and fathom the teaching of the Buddha. So this is very, very precious. So to not squander that opportunity is very important. And we don't know how much time we have as individuals. Really, anything could happen at any time. So the way we're using our minds, the kind of things we're focusing on, this is the yoniso manasikara, so wisely directed attention, and how are we directing our attention? So trying to direct it to refuge, to the practice. Or if wherever our attention gets directed, trying to apply Dhamma to it somehow. For example, the Dhamma of not sure. Trying to apply that in any way we can, and trying to bring it back to Dhamma. And this is important. So it's not the case that we just live in a monastery long enough, or we just meditate enough hours and then realization dawns, but we have to use the attention in a certain way, so direct it properly, and not forget to focus on those different factors of the path. Sometimes, if we like, it can be kind of fun to focus on one factor of the path and really try to develop it. And I know there's been some talk about Marshall Rosenberg and nonviolent communication, and that's like, for me, that's a focus on right speech and trying to make much of that one factor of the path and cultivate that. Or we might decide to focus on right livelihood, and right livelihood is like that's how we relate to our requisites, and this is defined as not hinting, not seeking gain with gain, not seeking gain through pressure or intimidation, living purely, taking what's given spontaneously. That's right livelihood for the monastics. For the lay people, the right livelihood is livelihood that doesn't include killing or poisons, or say dealing of illegal or harmful substances, things like that. So we might want to focus on right livelihood, or we might focus on right mindfulness, and this can actually, mindfulness should be done throughout in all of the factors of the path. Mindfulness of the body, so we might get really into mindfulness of the body, and we just had the Ajahn Ñāṇiko biography arrive finally, and he was all about asubha. That is a thread that runs through his whole biography, is focusing mindfulness of the body, but in terms of imagining his body deteriorating and making that a reality, making that contemplation a reality, and imagining it as if it was really happening, and that was really the core focus of his practice. That was the foundation of his practice. So we might end up taking one factor of the path and making much of that factor of the path and cultivating that. Or taking different Dhamma qualities like Khanti, like patience, and making much of that, or dana, generosity, and making much of that. So there's a wide range of things we can do depending on the inclination of our minds. There's a lot of different things we can do. We might have a lot of thinking. We might have a hard time cooling down the thinking. So we might go to Dhamma Vichaya and just think about Dhamma all the time. So no matter what, we can actually turn obstacles and hindrances, we can turn that to the path. If we're thinking a lot, we can change that thinking into Dhamma Vichaya, which is thinking, considering about the Dhamma. Or metta, goodwill. How do we actually have goodwill and a sense of well-wishing for ourselves and for others, and kind of coupling with that with discernment and seeing how difficult that is to actually do, to actually have a sense of well-wishing. And this is the opposite of wishing harm or wishing that something be destroyed or someone be destroyed. So wishing well to ourselves. Or trying to see with discernment that we already are wishing ourselves well just by the very fact that we're here in the monastery, or that we're listening to a Dhamma talk. Part of us sees that as beneficial, and we are trying to do something good for ourselves, so trying to make much of that we already do wish ourselves well, but it's more just acknowledging it. And there's always this kind of dynamic, this battle happening in the mind between the positive and the negative. And it's easy to slip into negativity, and so wanting to try to use these various skillful means to keep the mind positive and keep the mind wholesome. And the yoniso manasikara, the skillful directing of the mind, is necessary for that. Deep breathing, anapanasati. Get to practice a lot of that on the retreat. I've noticed that a number of people are making use of that group practice period in the afternoon. And so it's only mandatory for 4 of us, but I've noticed that others have been making use of the time. So that's a very skillful use of the time. You can come into the hall anytime and use this space to practice anapanasati. And also we've had the daily qigong, and that's also a breathing that's very meditative, using that as mindful movement that can be used in conjunction with the path. So trying to use the whole day, the whole schedule, to really cultivate the path in any way that we can, and try to lift up any positive qualities we've already cultivated, and not being too hard on ourselves. This is important. It can seem like there's just so much that needs to be cultivated. There's so much that we need to do. But we just come back to just whatever we're doing in the present, deciding to do one thing in the moment. So these are, I don't have so much to say. These are a few kind of thoughts bopping around this evening. I'll leave it there. So as we're doing during the winter retreat, these half-moon lunar observance nights, the all-night sit is completely optional, and some people may want to partake of it, so anybody who would like to partake of it may, and anybody else may practice on their own or take a rest. The truck could go now, so I need to wait to go up for anybody who wants to go up. Yeah, anybody who wants to stay can stay. Maybe we'll end with a closing chant. Pay respects, and then anybody who wants to stay can stay. Chant page 33, the first of sharing inspiration.